Thank you for joining us here for Beyond the Buzz. This is actually a special anniversary edition here, Beyond the Buzz, as we celebrate 1 year of actually doing this kind of format, and this is our 12th episode. So happy to do this. I'm thrilled to be joined by Tom Swoyer, President of GrandSKY. Tom, thank you for being here today to help mark this milestone with us.
Yeah, congratulations on a year. That's fantastic. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So yeah, Tom and I have known each other for a while. The test site and GrandSKY have worked together for a while. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation here. We can learn a little bit more about GrandSKY's history in this particular UAS ecosystem, how we've worked together. But I know a lot about you, Tom. I know a lot about GrandSKY, but for those of us on here that are not familiar, can you give us a little bit of an overview of GrandSKY and specifically the uniqueness of what you bring to this UAS ecosystem?
Sure, that's a big one. That's a mouthful of a question there. GrandSKY is, in its simplest form, is a place. It's a place where we are focusing on UAS flight operations. So we call it GrandSKY Flight Operations Center. We are physically located on Grand Forks Air Force Base. It's 217 acres, and we have invested roughly 35 or so $million in infrastructure, and that has allowed our tenants, partners, and some other investors to invest almost $160 million in facilities, hangars, office buildings, things like that to support their businesses, their UAS-related businesses. But at its core, GrandSKY is a development in three phases. The first one is the physical real estate. You have to have a place. And so you need the dirt, so to speak. The second part of it is the infrastructure. So we have access to the Air Force Base runway. We have access to, we are supported by the Grand Forks Air Force Base tower. Their emergency services are available to us if needed, thankfully not needed. And then the simple things of the taxiways, the ramps, all the different things that are needed to conduct flight operations, as well as all the utilities and things that people need for having a successful business. And then last but not least is airspace. First and foremost, I believe we are airspace developers. We are developing, and when I say an airspace developer, we are creating access to airspace in a physical place, specifically at GrandSKY, so that companies can come and fly UAS safely and sustainably there.
That's incredible. And as you talked a little bit about the infrastructure, I can imagine that this is probably an area that when people come, organizations come and they want to work with you, there's probably a level of this infrastructure they don't realize they need it until you tell them, like, I have all this space, I have this hangars, I have this office space. Can you provide just a little bit of extra detail on that? Because I suspect, hey, I want to go fly an aircraft, I want to go here to do it, but there's probably more than what meets the eye initially.
There is. So, some aircraft are runway dependent. MQ-9 Reapers, for example, and there's not a whole ton of runways in the United States of America where you can fly an MQ-9 Reaper. And so to do that, you've got to have an apron. You've got to be able to pull. Well, start at the beginning. You have to have a hangar to store the aircraft. You've got to be able to fuel and defuel the aircraft. You've got to be able to successfully operate the aircraft. Your aircraft pilot, the operator, needs to have a ground control station. All of the infrastructure, from the electricity to the data management, the Wi-Fi, everything that you need to be able to do that. And those people need lunches, and they need to occasionally use the restroom, and they've got to be able to do all of their regular daily life things. They need to be able to work out at a gym. So all of those elements. And then you get down to, okay, I've got to taxi that aircraft out to the runway. I've got to be able to take off from the runway. I've got to have physical separation from other aircraft. I've got to work it into the queue. We've got frequency deconfliction. We manage all of those aspects, not to mention all the legal requirements with legally flying a civilian-owned large UAS from an Air Force Base runway. And we have worked all of that out, and it's all in one place, in one binder. And so now we have a process that you can show up at GrandSKY and we can get you flying very quickly.
That's incredible. If I recall correctly, too, one big differentiator for GrandSKY versus maybe other places that could offer similar services is you do also have an on-site ice machine.
We do. You'd be surprised how important that on-site ice machine is.
Perfect. Well, we've seen incredible growth in the UAS ecosystem here in Grand Forks and, of course, across all of North Dakota. From your perspective, how has this industry evolved from those early days and to where we are now?
That's a fun question because when we started GrandSKY, it was our 10th anniversary actually.
Congrats.
Yeah, thank you. 10 years of operations now. In 2015, when we started this, there was no real legal authority to fly UAS commercially in the United States of America. You were there. And we knew it was going to happen at some point, but here we are trying to convince people to invest millions upon millions of dollars into a GrandSKY, into a concept that was not legal. There was no legal pathway or framework to be able to say, here's how this will work. And so as we have grown, okay, well, we can put a hangar in place. That doesn't mean we're going to fly a UAS, but we need a hangar eventually. And we're going to need to be able to put all these other kinds of tools and infrastructure in place. And then ultimately it was step by step, by little step, small incremental steps that your organization was instrumental in helping us and our partners with to get the aircraft in the air. And the Air Force was a huge partner in this, saying, yeah, we're okay with this. And that made the FAA say, oh, well, if you're okay with it, then I guess we'll be okay with it. So what could really go wrong? And I'm oversimplifying to be sure, but incrementally, I remember those early days of being able to fly aircraft, and we used chase planes. And, we had situations where we had an aircraft in the air, it was an MQ-1 at the time in the air, and the chase plane started to develop smoke in the cockpit at 9,000 feet. And the guys were already on bottle oxygen anyway, but now there's smoke in the cockpit. So they have to declare emergency and come back in. Now I have an unchased MQ-1 up in the air. So that has to declare emergency. This system worked. Everyone landed safely. Everyone was fine. There was no damage to any aircraft. Everything was great. But building those processes and procedures in those early days have set the stage for us to be able to credibly look at FAA in the eye and say, we have the safety procedures in place. This is how we've exercised them in the past. And here's what our pathway is for moving forward and managing it in the future. So all of those early days was definitely the crawl, walk, run scenario. And I like to say we're not running really yet. I think we're speed walking. We're walking with purpose.
No, that's a great recap of the early days. As you pointed out, I was definitely there as well. And we've come a long way, and it's exciting to see where things move forward. We're on the cusp of seeing some new regulations perhaps come out and new guidance. And but a lot of that, it did just happen. And you alluded to this earlier. We've worked together quite a bit. GrandSKY and the test site, we've had this strong partnership over the years. What initially kind of drew you to work with us, besides physical presence? We're both here in Grand Forks, but what's some of the you highlighted something that I don't have, which is the physical infrastructure. It is the hangar space. That's not something my organization focuses on. What's part of this partnership do I bring to the table that helps GrandSKY?
So you bring the Northern Plains test site brings an incredible value proposition to a GrandSKY, to anybody else, to Choctaw Nation, to Pendleton Range, to anything. Northern Plains test site could be the partner of everybody in this respect, because what you bring is the regulatory knowledge and experience to be able to tell, our operators, to be able to work with our operators to put their concept of operations into the right format that FAA can say, okay, we understand what you're trying to do here. What you have taught me is everything, there's a process and a procedure. And if you follow the process, sometimes as slow as it may be, you get to an operational flight at the end of the day, and you get people bought off. And it starts with, how do you even present the concept of operations to the FAA? How do we work with the different organizations that want to fly? Because you don't just come in and say, oh, well, here's this. Here's what we want to do. Well, no, rejected. Nope, you didn't do this format right. There's a lot of pitfalls in the approval process, and the UAS industry, new executive orders, and we'll understand how those will work somewhere in the future. But the UAS industry is a highly regulated industry with imperfect regulation at this point in time. And so we need a guide. We need the traffic cop to help us align around those regulations. And frankly, that's what I think the Northern Plains test site brings to the table, is you can do that anywhere. If you take the site out, say the Northern Plains Regulatory Authority. We're so much cleaner about what you guys are really doing. But
well, I appreciate that. And considering the last 10 years that we've been working together, are there any standout moments in that 10 years where we've worked together that kind of are still, front and center in your memory? Some things that we achieved in the past.
2018 stands out directly in my memory. 2018 was when we all got together, General Atomics, Northern Plains Test Site, and GrandSKY, and we got together to create a beyond visual line of sight capability using ground-based sense and avoid. I didn't know what any of those things meant at the time. I didn't know what GBSAA meant or anything like that. And General Atomics came to us and said, well, flying with chase planes is getting expensive. Okay, so how do we fix that? Well, we want to use the Air Force Base's radar to put a system in place where someone can look at a screen and I don't need a chase plane anymore. And I remember you and Nick Flom at the time saying, oh, yeah, we can do that. We can do that. And it took a little while. It took a lot of while. And we needed the Air Force, and they stepped in. We needed the state of North Dakota. The state stepped in. Your organization stepped in. I differentiate you from the rest of the state because the rest of the state, the governor's office, like, yeah, we'll support this. And then GrandSKY, we brought to the table the legal relationship with the Air Force so they could give us their radar feed. And then you brought the regulatory part with the FAA to the table to say, here's how this will work. And that has been the core foundational element of what separates GrandSKY from all the other test sites. Sorry, not test site in your world, but the other test locations around the country is this large beyond visual line of sight flight volume that we have.
Yes. And should be known too, it's now 2025 and that system is still operational. It is
Still operational.
If it's a good weather day, somebody's up flying using that system, from a simplified perspective, and it continues to bring value. So incredible piece of history there. I remember that vividly, and I remember the regulatory hurdles we had to overcome to get there.
Well, but I still look at it and say, look, this is the junior varsity system of what Vantis is going to be, and continue as Vantis grows. Not going to be. Vantis is it already. But as it grows its coverage and service volume across the entire state and possibly outside the state somewhere in the future, its roots came from this little system here at GrandSKY. And so our system is fraught with single points of failure all over the system. And we're not, really investing heavily in doing that because ultimately we believe that Vantis will be the product that we'll all use across the state. And so there's not much point in replicating that, but we will continue to operate that system until such time as Vantis is ready to take it over. So
excellent. And if any of my FAA friends listen in on this, we have mitigations in place for those single points of failure. So
those are,
No, this is great. And let's bring it to where we are today. We've had this incredible opportunity with the Department of Defense, specifically with the Office of Secretary of Defense out of the Pentagon. Can you talk a little bit about our partnership and how it's shaped larger UAS initiatives like Project Ultra?
Sure.
Project Ultra is this initiative. I'm hoping you can talk to us a little bit about what it is and how this is setting up for scalability and solving problems for the rest of the nation.
Wow, yeah,
lots there.
So, coming back to just our partnership and our relationship, Northern Plains has made it possible that I don't have to invest in all the regulatory knowledge. I can reach out to your organization and get the best regulatory experience and regulatory knowledge in the country. In my opinion, we've worked with a lot of folks, but yours shop is always and continues to be the best. So we don't work with anybody else anymore. And so I also like to think that from a GrandSKY perspective, we have made the investments in infrastructure that you've not had to make. So you haven't had to put hangars and runways and all these kinds of things in place. That's what we do very well. And you do the regulatory part. So I always think about it from the second the wheels of an aircraft leave the ground, it's your world. You're the regulatory experience. Once they're on the ground, that's my world. And that's what we know how to do very, very well. And all the ground support and all the infrastructure required to make that happen. So if we look at that, all of those investments over the last decade, because you guys are just a year older than us, right? You're 11, this is 11 years. So over this last decade, all of the regulatory experience you've built, so all the CONOPS and all the case studies and all the white papers and all the safety risk management scenarios and all of that documentation has been built up along with all of our infrastructure that's been built up. And all of that has grown to a point where now we're at a point where we can take that out to the market and say, yeah, we can deliver this for you. Office of Undersecretary of Defense has recognized that this is a place, because of the regulatory experience you bring and because of the physical infrastructure we bring, there is a place where there's a partnership that allows them to fly. And they were a little skeptical at first. Most people are a little skeptical at first, but once they come out and see it, and once they see what we can really do, now it's just a floodgate that's opening of work that's moving in all our general direction. Project Ultra is an example of that. It is a contract. It's a 5-year IDIQ contract with Office of Undersecretary of Defense through Grand Forks County, another very important partner in this entire scheme of things. The county raised their hand and said, we have been making investments in the UAS industry. We want to continue to support it. And if we can be a vehicle to prove that this process can work this way, they raised their hand to do it. And so that's been fantastic. But the relationship has allowed us to now bring Ultra to the table. And we just conducted flights in April, and we're about to conduct some flights in July. 416-mile round trip beyond visual line of sight, moving from Class Delta to Class Echo airspace, carrying payloads, deconflicted with Air Force operations. No airspace had to be sanitized, no military range, full national airspace exercise where we did it a bunch. And in July, we're going to fly a bunch more. And we're really going to prove we're going to take off with a payload, land with a payload, change the payload, and come back. And we're going to prove that we can do it over and over and over. And so we know it's technically viable. We will prove it's technically sustainable in July. And then as we move on through the rest of the year, we will start to make it economically sustainable. So true cargo logistics flights on an economically and technically sustainable way beyond line of sight in the national airspace.
That's great to hear it. And a little bit of extra detail. This isn't like a small unmanned aircraft either. This is a Class 3, as it's called.
Class 3,
so,
yeah.
And if I recall correctly, it's about a 50-mile direct one-way trip to the destination. And so, what'd you say, 400 and?
We did a 400-mile flight just in one flight.
Okay.
There was still gas in the tank, but we had to come down because a thunderstorm was starting to come into the area. But it was a 400-mile. We wanted to do an endurance flight to prove that the aircraft could go that far. And so the actual official logistics flight is 50 miles one way, land and then come back 50 miles, regardless of winds, regardless of anything, deliver a payload, pick a new payload up, bring it back, do that 10 times. 10 seems arbitrary, but it's like, prove it, you can do it. Keep doing it, going, and do that flight. And so, 50 miles one way, it's fun.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I mean, so you just talked, we're going to be doing a little bit more of that in July. What's after that? What's the vision behind this kind of this type of operation?
Sure. The vision is, so this is Department of Defense. They've got logistics needs, and they are looking at how drones are going to be able to satisfy those logistic needs. How do we avoid putting people in harm's way if we can avoid it? But how do we bring ammunition? How do we bring food? How do we bring medical supplies to the warfighter in theater? And so they're trying to understand how these drones can operate efficiently. The Navy wants to be able to resupply between ships while they're underway out in the ocean. They want to be able to do shore to ship. We want to do ship to shore. We want to be able to do stuff. So the Grand Forks Air Force Base Cavalier Space Force Station logistics run that we're doing is demonstrating over a certain distance a military resupply capability. From there, I see this going, and this is not part of Project Ultra yet, but where I see this going is where we start to look at missile field logistics. How do we replace very expensive helicopters and trucks with drones that can probably handle 70% of that resupply requirement? This also becomes rural last mile support. I don't think we're going to be able to do it with a quadcopter, even though that might be cheaper and more efficient. We're going to need larger aircraft that can survive in multiple weather conditions, wind conditions, and have the legs and range to be able to do this. So I see this ultimately becoming a commercially viable capability, especially in a rural environment.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was thinking the same thing. Is although our client is the Department of Defense and military resupply, we do this right. We are using industry to get there, and so this is an opportunity for industry to continue to mature and develop their platforms that ultimately could lead to civil commercial opportunities of similar type of operations in the NAM.
So this is where I think our partnership is going to go forward with. Is you and I have already started this conversation. How are we going to do this? Cargo delivery commercially generally requires a Part 135 certificate. So in another life, I have a company that has a Part 135 certificate, but it's not for drones, it's for crewed aircraft. But how are we going to be able to introduce that? Because there is no really good, extensive, viable opportunity without certification of an aircraft.
Right.
And we're seeing that in the market space. But certification is maybe not the easiest thing to undertake right now. So was there an interim step, much like eVTOL aircraft, where there's an interim step where you still need a 135 certificate, but there's how you're going to manage and maintain your aircraft, and we're going to put some hours on and demonstrate a viability of the market. And that's where I see this happening, and that's where I see our partnership really starting to move forward with.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that. And I think it's a natural spot here. We've gone through a lot of topics, and we have a few people that are listening in on our podcast or webcast here today. Open up to the audience. If there's anybody out there that have any questions for Tom, GrandSKY, the partnership, or just general questions for UAS, now's the time to bring them in. So I'll kind of give a moment for folks to send that through. But no, we've tackled a lot here. I think there's still a lot to solve. I like what you said earlier. We're at the point of speed walking, right? And I think that's absolutely correct. Something we've been up on panels talking about previously is, we're not trying to kill the vision behind this sometimes, but sometimes we have to get very pragmatic and realistic about the challenges we are facing. eVTOL is a good example. Advanced air mobility. These are all things that will come in time, but we're really trying to focus on these real core technical problems, get them matured, get them built out, get them developed. And I think that's something that's unique here for the Grand Forks region in North Dakota is we have, because of the last 10 plus years, we've been able to develop that ecosystem, that infrastructure, the partnerships, the legal framework, and the pedigree and credibility behind the regulatory and the safety piece. So,
you have you achieved a milestone, I think it was last year, with Vantis and the NTAP approval.
That's correct. Yeah.
That is going to be a really significant value add piece going forward, because the notion of quote unquote file and fly it can only happen in an NTAP type environment. And near term approval process, for those, I'm not good with the acronyms either, but that one I know. That near term approval process is right near.
That's correct.
Okay. Makes it so that Vantis can say you're authorized to fly.
Yes.
And so we don't have to go through as much of the regulatory hurdles. We can handle it more locally. I'm hoping the new executive orders enable more of that, and enable the Northern Plains test site to be able to be that authority on behalf of FAA to say, you know what, in our world here, we can say yes on your behalf and take that responsibility on. That will help the insurance industry catch up to all of us. That will help communications and radio frequencies and all of that catch up. And how are we going to manage those things? All of that element, how are we going to get data off of aircraft? How are we going to, all of that comes from the ability to fly more. And then we can solve those problems a little bit better.
And an element of those executive orders that were just released too is an expectation that the test site programs will be providing data and safety information to help accelerate that further. So I think that's a really excellent point. And yeah, to add just a little bit on to the near-term approval process, that essentially allowed the FAA to accept the level of safety of the infrastructure that is Vantis. And so as we have aircraft that are capable of using that infrastructure to fly beyond visual line of sight, that gives us something to look at and point to and say, hey, if you're going to bring an aircraft on to the system, here's the requirements you need to meet. And we do not have to go back to the regulatory drawing board to get that infrastructure approved. So it's really good. Let me see here. I think we might have one question. Let's pull that up here for a moment. All right, so we've got a few questions here. How is eVTOL different from VTOL? It's a great question.
So VTOL being just, and this is Tom's understanding of it, vertical takeoff and landing is VTOL, and that could be any vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, whether it is gas powered, hydrogen powered, or otherwise. eVTOL is specifically electric vertical takeoff and landing. So electric fan engines, electric motors. So it's specifically to an electric propulsion system.
And I would add on to, I think it's a really interesting topic with eVTOL. A lot more technical challenges we still face with that in terms of having enough electrical infrastructure to provide that capability. Might make sense in maybe niche urban markets right now, but in a place like North Dakota, we've got a little bit of characterizing of this further to see how it actually applies in this environment. That's my opinion. I don't know if you have that.
I have a lot of opinions about it. I believe our grid is nowhere near ready to be able to support the volume of advanced air mobility vehicles that are 100% electric. I think that batteries weigh the same whether they're full of electricity or not. Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting engineering challenge. And I think that in North Dakota, we do not have a generation problem. We have the power here. What we don't have is distribution networks to be able to support rapid charging of batteries and the substations required to do that. And that's going to be an investment. And there are a lot of cities that don't have that capacity in their downtown urban areas as well. And I think that's going to be a huge infrastructure opportunity going forward.
I agree. Last question it looks like on here is what happens after the 5-year Project Ultra IDIQ contract?
Well, there are option years baked into it, so they can continue to exercise option years. Our goal is to deliver on the scopes of work that we're being asked and all the task orders, and deliver in such a way that the government decides they want to issue a brand new contract to us. So that's our goal. I'm hopeful that there will be another contract on the back end of that. If not, we'll do whatever we're doing then at that point. So it's an opportunity to excel.
And selfishly, I hope that there's further opportunity as well. So I appreciate the questions being sent in. We're going to close this up here. Tom, any final comments or thoughts before we close this?
My final thoughts are, thank you to you and Victor off the screen here for setting this up and inviting me to it. Thank you to the entire Northern Plains Test Site team. It's a great group of people to work with. And I think that, I found alumni of the Northern Plains Test Site in different places across the country working for different companies. And your team always brings a level of professionalism that we appreciate. So thank you for helping that.
Yeah, so thanks, Tom, very much. I really appreciate you joining us and sharing your insights with us today. We really do value this partnership and your team as well. I know your team has grown recently as well and playing a pivotal role in this ecosystem. So we look forward to continuing this collaboration ahead. I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today for Beyond the Buzz and for all those that are going to listen into this in the future. Welcome. Appreciate you listening. I'm Trevor Woods as the Executive Director for the Northern Plains UAS Test Site. Tom Swoyer with President of GrandSKY. We appreciate your support and can't wait to keep the conversation going. Thank you.